So one might ask whether oikonomia, or as it were, the art of household management, as it was understood classically, is an art or a science. So let's look at some. I was kind of provoked to do, a more um, philosophical look at this issues that I think is that Citibank trader. Um, think the environment of American Psycho. Citibank trader, except we're in England. Um, I think his name is Gary Stevenson, and has been. I just watched the, this sad character, Piers Morgan, who's so isolated. Is like, oh, I have to keep every last dime. And, why are you trying to? Why are you trying to get so defensive when I, have trying to have hold a rational discussion? In a way, he was trying to hold a rational discussion, but I think the better part of the conversation was not about the rational. Probably, I think so. That should be, part of the issue. Is economics even susceptible of fully rational treatment? But so it's like, for instance, the guy has on. I think it's like I found him on X, but is he like? Probably he's a German guy, and so we have this sort of now. Here's the problem: if you have the sort of Spock or fake version of philosophy, which is now all prevalent, almost everybody takes this type of view. Then you say any accusation against a man is an ad hominem attack. So you say he's trying to undermine his credibility by pointing out that the guy is hired by trillionaires in order to, like, probably Elon Musk is paying for part of or Peter Thiel or whoever, is people who are on the side of the Mount Pelerin Society are funding this. They have this make-believe institutions. They have all this prestigious nomenclature about all floating about. And we're actually affiliated with the Normal Superior, et cetera, et cetera. They try to get something that's prestigious, and then they say this man works for this institute, and but then they have him trot out a party line. But in this case, so you could say one, the fake version is to say, oh, it's always an ad hominem attack to point out actually what. Like that Theaetetus was a mathematician, or that Theaetetus has n number of characteristics as listed by, if you read the Theaetetus, and then just like, oh, he has all this and this and this. He's quick to retention. These are his personal characteristics, and he's very like you, Socrates, and these are the reasons, and this is how the way he behaves, and this is how he carries himself. This is how his common ways of using his time is to talk about geometrical questions, and these are the type of people that he converts with, and this is his personal life and all the gossip. It's not illogical to consider the actual situation. So that's almost like everywhere we pretend it's illogical to consider the actual situation. So it was said this guy may be a shill working for this company, and maybe he's coming out with the party line and so on and so forth. But then, okay, we could also consider what he said. So he makes an argument. This is one of the guys on Piers Morgan. There are two guys, and Piers Morgan were all attacking this guy Stevenson, who's representing an argument in favor of a wealth tax. And then he has this sort of like a mechanism where he shows, you could see, if you just look, you could see, here's the mechanism. And when I've made trades for the last 10 years, like I've just been totally following the mechanism. It's like a piece of machinery. I just look at it. This is what it's doing, and just look. So like all three of them don't see what he's talking about. They don't like go right up to it and start to probe and see if it's real, but instead they trot out these arguments, and then we kind of wondered, what is this argument? Where did it come from, and what's it about? And then then if you take the Spock version, which is the fake version, you say immediately, oh, that's illicit. We're not allowed to consider it in that light. We must only see what he's actually saying. All right, what is he actually saying? He's actually making an argument that it would be better, instead of the wealth tax, he proposes instead to combat NIMBYism, because NIMBYism, taken as the leading driver of increased housing costs, because the not in my backyard protesters go to these like city councils, and they're like super disproportionately represented, and they always make it impossible for new housing developments, or it's super slowed down. They create a vetocracy, as Fukuyama calls it. This is one of Fukuyama's issues, by the way. The loss of state capacity. That somehow it falls under the loss of state capacity, because the government it would involve violating free speech rights and rights to people to practice NIMBYism would be somehow a violation of their freedoms that could never be estranged from. So it's like the argument he makes, it's not like then, okay, now we could say like, oh, if we avoid all ad hominem attacks, so this horrible ad hominem, like actually looking at what this human being is and why he's propounding this argument, is the argument true? But the problem is the argument, it's sort of like, yeah, there's a mechanism there. It does kind of like, if we sought NIMBYism, then that would change housing prices, because there'd be a lot more houses available, and the market might sort of correct where supply and demand got in link in a, as it were, more natural way, in the sense of the market fundamentalism. Yeah, there is something there, but the problem is, like, is that the question we're actually asking? No, because it's not. It's still something you could say, yeah, that does something. How much does it do? Does it really solve the problem? That's another question. But like admitting that it does something, that doesn't make it a better solution than the wealth tax. So like if we looked at the wealth tax, then we could see like how well that does. But I think we want to know in some way whether we actually understand what household management is here. So like, what is what is the actual goal? That's the problem. Neither of these actually include the goal. So if you just like sort of ask in a cold, logical way, so what is this true or is it not? Even if you know exactly what it's going to do, so say it like by 50% change the housing prices in favor of allowing that much larger proportion of people to afford houses. Is that good enough? Like, in the light of what? Like, in what context are we asking whether this thing that has some logical meaning as a device, as it were, like as a mechanism, like this is a mechanism, this is what it does, but somebody's offering it to you and they're like, this is the truth. And they're like, it comes with all this other stuff, Mount Pelerin Society, whatever. Friedrich von Hayek, who, by the way, von Hayek, he was a Fabian Society guy. The reason he didn't get in with the Fabian Society really is because they wouldn't let him be in charge. That's why. And he had like a ultra A personality. and he had to be in charge. So he went out on his own. But the reason I mentioned that is because what they call in this country this libertarianism. This actually is like it's not very different from socialism or Marxism, because the main sort of raison d'etre of Marxism was to produce the market fundamentalist situation, a genuinely free market. So it's like, in other words, it's like just get rid of all monopolies, just get rid of all the artificial, but just get rid of all monopolies. Then, in the Morgan, in the Milton Friedman form, then becomes government. It has this monopoly on regulations and things like on all these type of arguments. Which was basically Milton Friedman versus the Canadian economist of Kenneth Galbraith. And Galbraith sort of fellow who had been in power for some time sort of went down, and they had a contest with the big 2 sets of television shows, and there's a sort of big media contest. Which is better, the Friedman version of the universe or the Galbraith version? And then, Hinc lacrimae, hence all these tears. We arrive, now at our present situation, but that some of that near past is still like actually behind this argument that if you just said, oh, we can't go into the ad hominem, you wouldn't notice that it was actually coming from a specific set of principles and set of institutions and people and everything that goes behind this libertarian and sort of Marxist type of attitude. Just this sort of this sort of, how does it called, magical thinking. Because I mean to say it's like well, if we look at it just the way they see it themselves, which that would be pejorative, but it's like they themselves call it the invisible hand, which is this sort of unheimlich or uncanny phrase in a way. It's the belief in everything we already know, right? It's unleashing all the forces. So that's in a way. So allow me to be a little bit expressionistic with that, but in a way that brings us to this point of the Slaughter v. Trump case, and this, this overturning of the 1935 regulations on Federal Trade Commission and so on. So there was something by Dennis Killayer, where he was going into what type of, aside from the FTC, but what type of other powers are going to totally fall into Trump's hands. And so I think was the largest, most interesting topic, which, I mean, it's readily familiar to people that follow this kind of stuff, but I hadn't been thinking about it, is the shadow banking system. We have this type of funny terminology, like they talk about the Russian shadow fleet or whatever, which is like really just like ships that NATO, for whatever reason, has declared against NATO interests, or the shadow fleet. But they have this thing called the shadow banking system, which banks something like $250 trillion, and in which also, so the shadow banking system means that there's a set of regulations that covers banking, but all the shadow banks slip through those regulations, and in legal terms they're not called banks, but they're still doing credit and they're still doing everything banks do, but they've somehow managed to get out of the legal definition of a bank, so they don't fall under the regulations, the shadow banking system. And then a lot of these are like linked up with China, so there's like a heavy proportion of shadow banking in China, which doesn't mean like things that are hidden. It means rather just that they're hidden from the regulations. It's known how much money is changing hands in them, or there's figures are given. I mean, I don't know. As with regular, I mean, it's probably about the same as it is with regular banks, how much we could trust the figures. Yeah, but they're just free from the regulations that cover banks. So now these powers that are going to Trump, so this is the other thing. I make the argument that, it's in some way rational, this whole, I mean, I know John Yoo, okay, I've met him at the Federal Society meetings. He's a very nice man. And frankly, I don't think that he's presented as John Torquemada Yoo, but frankly, I think almost everything he says seems very reasonable, because it only makes arguments, like I said, there's a certain point where normal policing ends and torture begins. But somebody has to legally specify what that is, because we always think we kind of know, but somebody has to legally actually say, because people are going to be, given years of time in prison over this. Somebody has to legally specify what it is. That's all he was saying at the time of all the torture memo and all this stuff. He's simply saying something that must rationally be said, and then it gets presented as this villain, right? But I think, again, we cannot simply overlook this and pretend these arguments happen in a vacuum without that there is a specific man on a specific occasion making these remarks, or taken in some more direct way. The attempts to make logic into a sort of mathematical world apart from the world always seem to fail, because there's something else comes in, right? So this, I think, on the basics of economics, there's some question of, which is always deranging things in a way. I mean, in the same way, like Piers was being an asshole saying, why are you being so defensive, Gary? And like that. But on the other hand, he was kind of trying to see, why don't you face up to this argument about the NIMBYism, and why are you evading, even though you say this guy is it was a hitman just here to annoy us with his statements. But so then I think we see the problem. It's like, if Gary turns to address that, it's like, yeah, there is some truth to that in a certain way, but the problem is that actually our goal? Is that actually what we're trying to accomplish here? Like, are we trying to accomplish just this limited goal of the, in a way, from the point of view of what he's doing, it's irrelevant. It's a distraction from what his ultimate presupposition is, because he's trying to treat political economy as something like the management of a household, where obviously you don't want like rusted spoons in like one drawer and nice spoons in the other drawer. You want the management has some kind of customary sense about how things are done. So it's like, it seems like customary sense not to allow the vast proportion of the population not to be able to afford homes. It's like, that's sort of like what one does. One prevents a situation where the vast proportion of the population can't afford homes. If you start with that presupposition, then it looks different. You can't simply pretend this Cartesian sort of logical space, this mathematical logical space. It's never simply episteme. It also has to involve nous, is I guess the technical way to put it in Plato's terms. So, I mean, put the other way, you could argue for different sort of revelations of the true direction. And then you could sort of see the side of Scott Bessent, and this All Street people are saying, "Oh, we're going to give everyone a stake in the country, and kids are all going to have the starters and stocks." Because it's like only 10% of the population really has many stocks. Or plays in it, but they're saying, "Oh, we're going to sort of democratize the ownership of the country," and et cetera, et cetera. So they have all these grand plans that are connected ultimately to the symbol of the invisible hand, which in a certain way they worship. But it's got sort of like how does one say? I mean, to see it. I mean, you just have to know that there's a certain way that. Even though they worship it, they treat it also just in the way they treat ordinary things. It's part of their ordinary life. So I think we could understand partially the Piers Morgan and company pushback as representing a different vision, a different revelation of what the purpose is than Gary Stevenson had. Even though, if you just look at it sort of flatly, it seems like one offers an improvement in one way, and partially in terms of the NIMBY problem, another offers an improvement in another way in terms of the claim of the wealth tax and what it would do with regard to housing costs. And therefore you flatten it out and make it appear like it's just a choice between two technical solutions. But we could also look at it as two directions in a wider way, so that in a certain sense you could see where all the static comes from, and just that they're at odds in their basic purposes.